Today, we're talking about a man who, believe it or not, changed the world with a broom in his hand. Now, that might sound like some kind of fairy tale, but it's the real history of Saint Martin de Porres, the very first black saint of the Americas.
So, let's just paint a picture here. His story starts with this incredible contrast. We're in 16th century Peru. His father, a Spanish nobleman, a conqueror, and his mother, Ana Velázquez, a freed black woman from Panama. Right from his very first breath, he was living between two completely different worlds.
And that really brings us to the core question of this whole story. In a society that was built on this incredibly rigid racial hierarchy, how on earth did a man who is constantly looked down on because of his heritage rise up to become a global symbol of compassion and service?
To really get how he pulled this off, we've got to go right back to the beginning, because the challenges he faced were there from day one.
All right, so Martin was born in Lima, Peru, way back in 1579. As we said, his dad was a Spanish aristocrat, and his mom was of African and indigenous Panamanian heritage. Now, this mixed parentage put him in a really tough spot socially.
And look, this wasn't just some abstract social issue. For him, it was deeply personal. His own father, Don Juan de Porres, was apparently so ashamed of Martin's darker skin that for years, he just refused to publicly admit he was his son. I mean, can you imagine? That rejection was just a constant part of his early life.
You know, a lot of people might have become bitter from that, but not Martin. Instead, he just threw himself into serving others. By the time he was only 12 years old, he was already an apprentice to a barber surgeon. And back then, that meant you learned everything from cutting hair to pulling teeth and even treating wounds. He was already healing people before he was even a teenager.
And this drive to serve, well, it led him straight to the church. And that's where he would end up earning his really unforgettable nickname.
So, when he turns 24, Martin decides he wants to join the Dominican religious order. But there was a massive obstacle in his way. A Peruvian law literally forbade people of African or indigenous descent from becoming full members. The whole system was designed to keep people like him out.
So what does he do? He finds a loophole through humility. He asks to join not as a brother, but as a volunteer, basically a servant who would do the most thankless jobs. And this is so important. His humility wasn't just him being quiet. In a system built to exclude him, it became his strategy. It was his way of getting a foot in the door to prove his worth from the absolute bottom up.
And his service just blossomed from there. His constant, diligent sweeping earned him the title, the Saint of the Broom, and that wasn't an insult, it was a sign of deep respect. He used his medical skills in the infirmary, he went out and begged for money to feed the poor, he founded an entire orphanage, and even planted an orchard for the community. But Martin's story, it goes way beyond just earthly charity. His life was also reportedly filled with these extraordinary events that, well, defied any simple explanation.
Fellow monks and other people in Lima started reporting, well, some pretty wild things. The first was levitation. They claimed that when he was in his most intense prayers, he would physically float in the air, just completely lost in his devotion.
And then there were the stories about Martin having the gift of bilocation. Get this, missionaries and merchants came back from their travels claiming they had met him in places as far away as Japan and Mexico, even though he had never ever physically left Lima.
So, just so we're all on the same page, bilocation is this super rare, reported phenomenon where a person can supposedly show up in two separate places at the exact same moment. It was one of the most remarkable abilities people said he had. But despite all these incredible stories and his obvious healing skills, Martin stayed so humble, and his quote just captures his mindset perfectly. "I cure them, but God heals them." He never, ever took the credit. He always saw himself as just a tool for a higher power.
And you know, his compassion wasn't just for humans. And for his time, this was radical. He cared for all living creatures. He was a vegetarian, he ran a little hospital for sick animals, and he's often shown in paintings caring for mice and dogs, all together.
So after a lifetime of service and wonder, how is Martin de Porres remembered today? Let's take a look at his lasting legacy.
When he died in 1639, the people of Lima already saw him as a saint. But, you know, official recognition from the Catholic Church, that took a long time. He was beatified in 1837, but not finally canonized, made a full saint until 1962.
Just think about that for a second.
More than 300 years. It took the official institution whole centuries to recognize a man that the people on the street had revered from the day he died.
When he was finally canonized, Pope John XXIII gave him the perfect title, Martin of Charity. Today, he's the patron saint of mixed-race communities, public health workers, and people in humble jobs like barbers and street cleaners. His life is just this powerful, powerful example of overcoming prejudice with relentless, humble service.
And that really brings us full circle. Martin's story happened in the 16th century, but it feels incredibly relevant today, doesn't it? So I'll just leave you with this question. In a world that is still so often defined by status, by wealth, by division, what can we all learn from the man who found greatness and holiness in a simple broom?